Steve had migraine headaches, and I think this is what led up to it, because there were a couple of guys that you would know very well that were huge Hall of Famers that had messed with Steve on the flight, and Steve was trying to sleep. They didn't tell me Steve was in a horrible mood. They said, hey, go mess with Steve.
JBL names 9 wrestlers he hated. That phrase alone should tell you everything about the dark side of professional wrestling. He terrorized me. Those 3 words have been whispered, shouted, and typed by some of the biggest names in the business. This is not about storylines or scripted drama. This is not about characters playing heel or face. This is about real people, real abuse, and a locker room culture that protected bullies for far too long. This is about a system that rewarded cruelty and punished people for standing up for themselves. Wrestling is bigger now than it has ever been. The shows are global. The stars are household names. The production values rival Hollywood movies. And the fans expect something better than the old days when hazing was just part of paying your dues. Today, people speak up. Today, accountability matters. Today, the idea that you have to suffer abuse to prove you belong in the industry seems absurd. But there was a time when one man held the power to make or break careers based on whether he liked you or not. That man was John Bradshaw Layfield. These are the 9 names tied to his worst backstage stories. 9 people who lived through hell. 9 people who finally told the truth. Before we dive in, do me a favor. If you are watching this video and you are feeling the hype, hit that hype button. Show the video some love. Give hype to the content. It helps more than you know. Alright, let's get into it. JBL did not create the culture of bullying in wrestling. He inherited it from a generation that believed respect was earned through pain. When he walked into the industry in the mid-1990s, the locker room was run by old school veterans who believed in tough love as a teaching method. They believed that physical and mental endurance were the only real measures of a wrestler's worth. They believed in ribs, which are pranks designed to test how much abuse you could take. They believed in breaking people down to see who would survive. JBL learned from men like Black Bart and Brad Ringans, tough coaches who represented that old school philosophy. And he learned well. He absorbed those lessons and internalized that mindset. When he arrived in WWE in 1995 as Justin Hawk Bradshaw, he adopted a cowboy persona that mirrored the grit of his mentors. He was tough, he was mean, he was intimidating, and he knew how to play the political game in the locker room. By the time he formed the Acolytes Protection Agency with Ron Simmons, JBL was more than just a wrestler. He was an enforcer. He was the guy who made sure the young talent knew their place in the hierarchy. He was the guy who decided what was acceptable and what was not. And he had the backing of the most powerful figure in the locker room, The Undertaker. Together with The Undertaker, JBL established Wrestlers Court. This was not a joke. This was not a storyline. This was a real thing that happened backstage at WWE events. The Undertaker acted as the judge. JBL acted as the prosecutor. Veterans like Chris Benoit and members of the APA acted as enforcers. If you broke locker room etiquette, you went to court. If you sat in the wrong seat on the tour bus, you went to court. If you did not show enough respect to a veteran, you went to court. If someone decided they did not like you, you went to court. The penalties ranged from public humiliation to having your bags thrown around to being banned from the locker room entirely. Proponents said it kept order. They said it maintained the hierarchy. They said it weeded out people who could not handle the pressure of being on the road. Victims called it organized harassment. They called it bullying with a gavel, and JBL was at the center of it all, pointing fingers and handing out punishments. He thrived in that role. He loved being the prosecutor. He loved having the power to decide who stayed and who got punished. For years, that system worked for him, until it did not. So, let's talk about the 9 people who felt the full force of his reign. 9 individuals whose stories paint a picture of what it was really like to be on the wrong side of JBL's power. Number 9, Mauro Ranallo. This is where the old world collided with the new one. This is where the tribal culture of the locker room smashed into modern corporate standards and social media accountability. In 2017, Mauro Ranallo was one of the lead commentators for WWE. He was on SmackDown. He was talented. He was passionate. He loved the business. His commentary was energetic. He brought a unique style to the broadcast table. But Mauro also had bipolar disorder, and he was open about his mental health struggles. He talked about it publicly. He advocated for awareness. That openness should have been respected. Instead, it became a target. JBL went after Mauro on a WWE network show called called Bring It to the Table. The show was supposed to be a discussion panel about wrestling, but JBL turned it into a platform to mock Mauro. He criticized Mauro for being too active on social media. He made fun of Mauro for being excited about winning industry awards. The comments were condescending. They were mean-spirited. They were designed to belittle. And they happened at a time when WWE was promoting an anti-bullying campaign called Be a Star. Think about that for a second. The company was running commercials telling kids not to bully. They were partnering with schools. They were positioning themselves as champions of kindness. And at the same time, one of their own announcers was publicly tearing down a colleague who was dealing with a serious mental health condition. The backlash was immediate. Fans were furious. They saw the hypocrisy. Colleagues spoke out. People who had worked with Mauro defended him, and Mauro eventually left the broadcast team. WWE said it was a mutual decision. They released a statement saying both sides agreed it was time to part ways. But everyone else said it was because JBL made his life unbearable. The public narrative was clear. JBL's bullying had pushed Mauro out. The Fire JBL movement started trending on social media. People demanded accountability. They called for JBL to be terminated. They organized campaigns. For the first time, the audience was not willing to accept the boys will be, boys excuse. This was not a rib. This was not tough love. This was workplace harassment, and it was happening in front of millions of people. JBL eventually stepped away from full-time commentary. He was not fired. He was quietly moved into a different role, but the damage was done. Mauro's story became the symbol of everything wrong with the old locker room culture. It showed that hazing and bullying were not just backstage problems. They were public problems. They had real consequences for real people, and they could no longer be hidden behind the curtain. This was the moment when the industry realized it had to change, because if it did not change, the fans would force it to. But to understand how it got that bad, we need to rewind. We need to go back to the beginning of JBL's time as an enforcer. We need to see how the pattern started. We need to see how it was allowed to continue for years without anyone stopping it. So let's go back to the late 1990s and early 2000s, when JBL was building his reputation as the locker room's toughest man. Number 8, Matt and Jeff Hardy. The Hardy boys were young when they joined WWE. They were brothers. They were hungry. They were talented. They had grown up performing in their backyard. They had worked the independent circuit. They had paid their dues in the traditional sense. But to JBL, they were still kids. They were still targets. And JBL had a test for them. This test was not about wrestling. It was not about learning how to work a match or how to cut a promo. This test was about obedience. Matt Hardy later revealed what happened. JBL told them to drive drunk. He told them to throw beer cans at street signs. This was not a joke. This was not a storyline. This was JBL trying to force two young wrestlers into doing something reckless and illegal just to see if they would do it. Just to see if they would follow orders no matter how dangerous or stupid those orders were. The Hardys refused. They said no. They were not going to drive drunk. They were not going to put themselves and other people at risk just to prove their loyalty to a veteran. And JBL retaliated. He stole their bags from the locker room. That was the punishment for not playing along. That was the price of saying no. Think about what that says about the culture. This was not about respect. This was not about etiquette. This was not about learning the business. This was about power. JBL wanted to see if the Hardys would break the law just to prove they were loyal to him. When they refused, he went after their property. He made sure they knew there were consequences for defying him. This was not hazing. This was a power trip, and it was allowed to happen because nobody in management was willing to step in and say it was wrong. The Hardys could have been injured. They could have been arrested. They could have hurt someone else. But JBL did not care. He cared about asserting dominance. He cared about making sure everyone knew he was in charge. And when two young wrestlers refused to bow down, he punished them. That is not leadership. That is not mentorship. That is bullying, pure and simple. Number 7, Steve Blackman. If the Hardy story showed how JBL used power, the Steve Blackman story showed what happened when that power met resistance. Steve Blackman was not like most wrestlers. He was a legitimate martial artist. He had trained in Kempo, karate, and other disciplines. He was skilled in self-defense. He was quiet. He was focused. He did not drink. He did not party. He did not engage in the social games that the locker room loved. He kept to himself. He did his job, and he expected to be left alone. But JBL saw that as a challenge. He saw Blackman's quietness as weakness. He saw an opportunity for a rib. And on May 23rd, 1999, at a Kansas City airport, JBL made one of the worst mistakes of his life. JBL was drunk. He had been drinking on the flight, and he decided to mess with Blackman. He started patting Blackman on the rear end, over and over, despite warnings, despite Blackman telling him to stop. Blackman was was tired. He had just gotten off a long flight. He had a migraine. He was not in the mood for games. And he told JBL multiple times to stop, but JBL kept going. He thought it was funny. He thought Blackman would just take it. He was wrong. When they landed and went to the baggage claim area, JBL kept it up. He kept patting Blackman, and eventually Blackman snapped. Accounts from people who were there say Blackman moved fast. He threw a series of rapid strikes, backhands, jabs. He knocked JBL to the ground. The two of them ended up scuffling on a moving baggage carousel. Other wrestlers had to pull them apart. The next day, the roster gathered in the arena cafeteria. Blackman confronted JBL again, and this time, JBL backed down. He apologized. He apologized in front of the entire roster. He did not want a second fight. He knew he had made a mistake, and that tells you everything you need to know about JBL's mentality. He was only a bully when he thought he could get away with it. He only picked on people who he thought would not fight back. When he met someone who could actually defend themselves, he folded. He apologized. He moved on. This was not about toughness. This was not about enforcing respect. This was about picking on people who could not defend themselves. And when someone finally stood up, JBL backed down immediately. The airport incident became legendary in wrestling circles. It became a story that people told to show that JBL was not as tough as he pretended to be, and it showed that his power only extended as far as people allowed it to. Number 6. The Miz. Mike Mizanin came into WWE through a path that many veterans hated. He was on MTV's The Real World. He won the Tough Enough competition. He had not spent years driving from town to town in the independent circuit. He had not worked in front of 50 people in a high school gym. He had not paid his dues in the traditional way. That background made him an outsider. In the eyes of many veterans, he was a reality TV star playing wrestler. He did not belong, and they were going to make sure he knew it. The incident that started it all was the chicken crumb affair. The details vary depending on who tells the story, but the basic facts are these. The Miz was accused of eating chicken over a gear bag in the locker room. Some people say it was referee Scott Armstrong's bag. Others say it was Chris Benoit's bag. But whoever's bag it was, the reaction was swift and severe. The Miz was banned from the locker room, not for a day, not for a week, for 6 months. For half a year, he could not change with the rest of the roster. He had to change in public restrooms. He had to change in janitor closets. He had to find whatever private space he could in the arena and get ready there. Imagine showing up to work every day and being told you are not allowed in the room where everyone else gets ready. Imagine the humiliation of walking into a public bathroom at an arena and trying to get into your wrestling gear while fans are washing their hands next to you. Imagine trying to prepare mentally for a match while sitting on a toilet in a stall because you have nowhere else to go. That was the Miz's life for 6 months, and JBL made it worse. He did not just enforce the ban, he mocked the Miz constantly, on commentary, in front of the other wrestlers. He made jokes. He made sure everyone knew the Miz was an outcast. He turned the Miz into a punchline. Later, after the Miz became successful, JBL admitted he was hazing him. He said it was a test. He said it was about seeing if the Miz could handle the pressure of being on global television. He said it was about making sure the Miz had the mental toughness to succeed. But here is the thing. The Miz did not need to be humiliated to prove he could handle pressure. He needed to be trained. He needed to be mentored. He needed guidance. Instead, he was tortured. He was treated like garbage. And the fact that he survived and became a successful star says more about his toughness than it does about JBL's methods. The Miz himself has talked about this period in interviews. He has said that JBL would be mean to him in front of others. JBL would mock him. JBL would tear him down. But then when they were alone, JBL would sometimes offer quiet praise. He would say the Miz was doing a good job. He would give him tips. That suggests JBL's hatred was at least partly a performance. It was an act designed to reinforce the social hierarchy. But even if it was an act, it had real consequences. The Miz spent 6 months being treated like he did not belong. And for what? To prove he was tough? He already was tough. He made it through tough enough. He earned a contract. The only thing the hazing proved was that the locker room culture was broken. Number 5. Blue Meanie. Brian Heffron, known as the Blue Meanie, had a history with JBL that went beyond backstage politics. Blue Meanie had been part of ECW. He had been part of the Philadelphia-based promotion that WWE eventually bought. And Blue Meanie had spoken out online about JBL's bullying. He had posted about it on message boards and early social media. And JBL did not take kindly to that. At ECW One Night Stand in 2005, WWE brought back ECW for a special pay-per-view event. event. It was a nostalgia show. It was supposed to be a celebration. There was a multi-man brawl planned for the end of the show. It was supposed to be controlled chaos. Wrestlers from WWE and ECW alumni would all get in the ring and brawl. It was meant to look wild but be safe. But JBL turned it into something else. According to Blue Meanie, JBL delivered real punches during that brawl. Unscripted punches, punches that were meant to hurt. He specifically targeted a recent scar on Blue Meanie's face. He hit him there multiple times. He left Blue Meanie bloodied. Blue Meanie says he needed stitches after the match. He also says JBL wore his rings during the punches to make them hurt more. That is a serious violation of professional wrestling protocol. Wrestlers know how to work. They know how to make things look good without actually hurting each other. They pull their punches. They protect each other. JBL broke that code. He used a televised event to settle a personal grudge. He used the cover of a worked match to deliver real violence. And he did it in a way that could have caused serious permanent injury. WWE tried to smooth things over afterward. They offered Blue Meanie a short-term contract. They gave him a match on SmackDown against JBL. It was supposed to be a way to make things right, but everyone knew what it really was. It was damage control. In that SmackDown match, something interesting happened. Stevie Richards, who was Blue Meanie's longtime friend and tag team partner, was part of the match. And during the match, Richards delivered a chair shot to JBL's head. It was notoriously stiff. It was one of the hardest chair shots anyone had seen in a long time. Richards later said he did it as a receipt. He did it as payback for what JBL did to Blue Meanie. And JBL took it. He had to. Because if he complained, he would be admitting that he had done something wrong in the first place. Years later, Blue Meanie and JBL reconciled. They became what Blue Meanie called Twitter buddies. They would interact online. They seemed to have moved past it, but that does not erase what happened. JBL used his position to hurt someone on live television. He abused his power. And the only reason there was any justice at all was because Stevie Richards was willing to risk his own career to stand up for his friend. That chair shot could have gotten Richards fired, but he did it anyway, because sometimes someone has to stand up. Number 4, Joey Styles. Joey Styles was not a wrestler. He was a commentator. He was the voice of ECW. His high-pitched "Oh my God" call was iconic. When ECW folded and WWE bought the company, Styles joined WWE. He did commentary for a while. Then he moved into the digital media department. He became the director of digital media content. He was a behind-the-scenes guy. He was not a performer. He was not a big guy. He was not someone you would expect to get into a fight. But none of that mattered to JBL. During the 2008 tribute to the troops tour in Iraq, JBL decided Joey Styles was going to be his target. The harassment started immediately. Verbal abuse, condescension. JBL would make fun of Styles in front of others. He would talk down to him. He would treat him like he was beneath everyone else. And it went on for days. At one point, JBL intentionally spilled a drink on Styles. It was deliberate. It was meant to humiliate, and for Styles, it was the last straw. Styles was viewed by many in the locker room as a nerdy non-combatant. He wore glasses. He was not a fighter. He was a commentator, a guy who sat at a desk and talked. And JBL seemed to think that made him an easy target. JBL seemed to think Styles would just take it. But Joey Styles had a breaking point. After days of abuse, after being harassed and humiliated in front of his colleagues, Styles snapped. He punched JBL, one punch, right in the face, and it gave JBL a black eye, a visible, undeniable black eye that he had to hide under a cowboy hat for days. The locker room reaction was telling. Instead of siding with the veteran wrestler, instead of backing up JBL, people respected Styles for standing up. They were tired of watching JBL bully people who could not fight back. They were tired of the hazing. They were tired of the atmosphere of fear. And when someone finally did fight back, it felt like justice. It felt like a win for everyone who had ever been bullied by JBL. JBL stayed quiet after that. He did not brag about the incident. He did not try to get revenge. He just moved on. He hid his black eye and pretended it did not happen. And that, once again, showed that JBL only picked fights he thought he could win. When someone hit back, he backed down. He did not escalate. He did not retaliate. He just moved on to easier targets. Number 3, Justin Roberts. Justin Roberts was a ring announcer. His job was to stand in the ring and introduce the wrestlers. He would say their names. He would read their accomplishments. He would make the entrances feel important. It was a support role. It was not glamorous, but it was necessary. And Justin Roberts was good at it. But according to his book, Best Seat in the House, JBL made his life a living hell for years. Roberts says JBL would harass him backstage whenever he saw him. He would throw Roberts' bags around, he would knock them over, he would scatter Roberts' belongings. He would make derogatory comments about Roberts' life and worth. He would tell Roberts he was worthless. He would tell him he did not belong. And it went on for years. Not days, not weeks, years. But the most serious allegation is about a passport theft. Roberts claims that during an overseas tour, his passport was stolen. Think about what that means. If you are traveling internationally and you lose your passport, you are in serious trouble. You cannot fly home. You cannot prove your identity. You can be stranded in a foreign country. You can miss shows. You can lose your job. It is a nightmare. Roberts says that his passport disappeared during a tour, and he believes JBL was behind it. JBL denied it. He said he had nothing to do with it. But then John Morrison came forward with a different story. Morrison said that JBL had asked him and Joey Mercury to steal the passport. Morrison and Mercury were traveling with the group. They were younger wrestlers, and JBL approached them and asked them to take Roberts' passport. Morrison says they refused. They told JBL they were not going to do it, but the passport was still taken. Someone took it, and Roberts believes it was done at JBL's direction. Roberts also claims that when he reported the incident to Vince McMahon, the chairman of WWE, McMahon laughed it off. He treated it like a joke. He did not take it seriously. He did not investigate. He did not punish anyone. He just moved on. And that is the culture we are talking about. This was not just about JBL. This was about a management structure that allowed this behavior to happen. When the boss thinks passport theft is funny, when the chairman of the company treats potential criminal behavior as a harmless prank, you know the system is broken. You know there is no accountability. Roberts' story is important because it shows how far the hazing went. This was not just ribs. This was not just pranks. This was potentially criminal behavior. Stealing someone's passport could be prosecuted. It is theft of government property. It is a federal offense, and it was enabled by people at the highest level of the company. Number 2, René Duprée. René Duprée debuted in WWE at just 19 years old. He was a kid. He was inexperienced. He was eager to learn, and he was French-Canadian. That combination of youth and foreign heritage made him a target. Duprée has alleged that JBL subjected him to a constant barrage of verbal abuse every day. From the moment JBL saw him to the moment they parted ways. Homophobic slurs, xenophobic slurs, hateful language designed to tear Duprée down. Duprée specifically claimed that JBL called him a hateful slur every single day. Not sometimes, not occasionally, every single day. Imagine being 19 years old. Imagine trying to break into the industry you love. Imagine working your entire life to get this opportunity. And then imagine being called slurs by a veteran who is supposed to be a leader, a veteran who is supposed to be teaching you, a veteran who is supposed to be making you better. That is not hazing. That is not tough love. That is a hostile work environment. That is discrimination. That is abuse. Duprée was in a vulnerable position. He was one of the youngest people on the roster. He did not have allies. He did not have protection. And JBL used that power imbalance to make his life miserable. Duprée later described JBL as someone who made life hell for the boys. He said JBL was an expletive who enjoyed hurting people, and he was not alone in that assessment. Multiple wrestlers have echoed similar sentiments over the years. The pattern is clear. JBL used personal identity as a weapon. He went after people's backgrounds. He went after their characteristics. He went after the things they could not change. He went after their nationality. He went after their perceived sexuality. He went after anything he could use to humiliate and break them down. And he did it day after day after day. That is not building toughness. That is breaking people. That is creating trauma. And it was allowed to happen because the culture said it was okay. Number 1, Mark Henry. Even elite athletes were not safe. Even people with the most impressive credentials were subjected to the system. Mark Henry was a world's strongest man winner. He was an Olympian. He had competed at the highest level of strength sports. He had the kind of physical credentials that should have earned automatic respect. He was legitimately one of the strongest human beings on the planet. But when he joined WWE, he was still subjected to hazing. He was still put through the ringer. He has talked in interviews about how difficult his transition into the business was. And he has identified the hazing and the locker room culture as a major factor in that difficulty. The fact that someone like Mark Henry was targeted shows just how pervasive the system was. It did not matter if you were the strongest man in the world. It did not matter if you were an Olympian. If the locker room enforcers decided you needed to be tested, you were tested. And JBL was the chief prosecutor in that system. He was the one who decided who got put on trial in wrestlers' court. He was the one who presented the cases. He was the one who handed out punishments. And he did it with the approval removal of management. Records and accounts suggest that Vince McMahon viewed the internal power dynamics as a way to weed out the weak. The philosophy was that only people with thick skin and resilient personalities would survive. Only people who could handle the hazing would make it. But what that really meant was that people who were willing to tolerate abuse were rewarded. People who stayed silent were rewarded, and people who stood up for themselves were punished. People who complained were labeled as soft. People who pushed back were labeled as troublemakers. The system was designed to protect the bullies and punish the victims. Mark Henry eventually earned respect. He became a legend. He had an incredible career, but it should not have taken years of hazing to get there. He should have been respected from day one. His accomplishments outside of wrestling should have been enough. So, why did this happen? Why was JBL allowed to operate like this for so long? The answer lies in tribalism. Wrestling culture has always been built around an us versus them mentality. The boys versus everyone else. The boys were the wrestlers, the performers, the people who put their bodies on the line every night. Everyone else was an outsider. Fans were outsiders. Media were outsiders. Even management were outsiders. The locker room was a sacred space, and hazing was supposed to be an initiation rite. It was supposed to forge bonds. It was supposed to build the kind of trust you need when your physical safety depends on your partner protecting you. The logic, as JBL and others explained it, was simple. If you could trust someone to have your back in the ring, where one wrong move could end your career, you needed to know they were tough enough to handle anything. You needed to know they were loyal. You needed to know they would not break under pressure. JBL himself has said in interviews that hazing was necessary. He said it was about figuring out if someone would be on the side of the boys or the side of the fans in a high-pressure situation. He said it was about weeding out people who did not belong. The Mauro Ranallo incident was the breaking point. When JBL went after Mauro in 2017, the public backlash was swift and severe. This was not happening in the privacy of a locker room. This was happening on a WWE network show. This was happening on social media. This was happening in front of everyone, and the audience was not willing to accept it. Fans started the Fire JBL movement. They organized campaigns. They tagged sponsors. They made noise. Advertisers got nervous. WWE had to respond. They could not ignore it. And while JBL was not fired, he was quietly moved away from the commentary desk. He stopped appearing on television as regular. He took on a reduced role. The message was clear. The old ways were no longer acceptable. The days of the enforcer were over. The locker room culture has changed dramatically since then. Triple H, who took over creative control of WWE after Vince McMahon stepped back, has been widely praised by both current and former wrestlers for transforming the backstage atmosphere into something healthier and more professional. The Undertaker himself, the man who once presided over wrestlers' court as judge and final authority, has talked publicly about how different and improved things are now compared to the old days. He said that in the old days, if the boss was stressed about ratings or business or anything else, everyone in the building was stressed. The atmosphere was tense and hostile. There was fear in the air. People walked on eggshells. But now, under the new leadership structure, there is trust in the system and in the people running things. There is accountability built into the processes. There are structures in place to handle conflicts and grievances. There are actual rules that apply to everyone regardless of their position or tenure. There are consequences for bad behavior that are enforced consistently. And most importantly, there are fewer self-appointed enforcers running the room based on their own personal codes and grievances. Performers like The Miz and John Morrison, who came into wrestling from non-traditional backgrounds and grew up as fans rather than coming through the old territorial system, have helped shift the culture in a more modern and professional direction. They did not grow up in the locker rooms of the 1980s and 1990s. They grew up watching wrestling on television like millions of other fans. They came from reality television and mainstream media backgrounds. And when they encountered the old hazing culture, they were not willing to simply accept it as the price of admission. They were not willing to stay silent about abusive behavior just because that was how things had always been done. Morrison later said in an interview that the backstage culture today seems to have fewer difficult people and fewer toxic personalities than it did during his earlier run with the company. But he also added something interesting. He wondered aloud whether he himself might have been one of the difficult people back then, one of the people who contributed to the problem. That kind of self-reflection and willingness to examine your own role in a toxic system is incredibly important. It shows that people are thinking critically about the past rather than just defending it. It shows that people are genuinely trying to learn from mistakes and do better going forward. JBL was a decorated WWE champion during his in-ring career. He was a talented performer who understood psychology and storytelling. He was legitimately good at playing a heel character and generating heat from audiences. But he was also, undeniably, the most visible face of an era that was defined by systematic bullying, organized hazing, and the abuse of power by veterans over younger and more vulnerable performers. And his legacy will always be complicated and controversial because of that dual nature. The good does not erase the bad. The championship reigns do not erase the passport theft allegations. The entertaining matches do not erase the hateful slurs directed at a 19-year-old kid trying to break into the business. JBL has reconciled and made peace with some of his former targets over the years since stepping back from his enforcer role. He and Blue Meanie are genuinely friends now. They interact positively on social media. They have appeared together at events. He and The Miz have developed mutual professional respect over time. The Miz has said publicly in multiple interviews that he does not hold grudges about what happened. He has said that he understands it was part of the culture at the time. He has moved past it emotionally and psychologically. But here is what is important to understand. Personal reconciliation between individuals does not erase historical fact. The fact that two people have made peace with each other does not mean the original behavior was acceptable or justified. The scars from that era are still there for many people. The emotional and psychological trauma is still real for those who experienced it. The damage to careers and mental health cannot simply be undone by a handshake or a friendly tweet years after the fact. And the lessons that emerge from these 9 stories are absolutely clear and must not be forgotten as the industry continues to evolve. Speaking up about abuse matters. Breaking the silence matters. Holding powerful people accountable for their actions matters, no matter how important or successful or untouchable they might seem. Transparency and honesty about what really happens behind the scenes matters. The willingness of people like Justin Roberts to write books detailing their experiences matters. The willingness of people like John Morrison to confirm uncomfortable truths even when it might have been easier to stay quiet matters. And the culture of any organization, whether it is a wrestling company or any other workplace, is only as healthy and functional as the people within it are willing to demand that it be. If people accept abuse, abuse will continue. If people demand better, things will improve. It really is that simple. Wrestling as an industry is in a demonstrably better place now than it was during JBL's peak years as locker room enforcer. The modern locker room is more diverse than it has ever been in the history of the business. The performers come from all kinds of different backgrounds and life experiences. Former legitimate athletes and Olympians, actors and entertainers from mainstream media, independent wrestlers who built their careers outside the traditional system, people who grew up as passionate fans of the product, and they are much more willing to speak out publicly about problems when they see them. They are more willing to challenge bad behavior directly. They are more willing to use their platforms and their voices to demand accountability. And critically, the fan base will no longer tolerate systematic bullying and abuse the way previous generations of fans did. The Fire JBL movement that emerged on social media during the Mauro Ranallo situation demonstrated that clearly. The immediate and severe backlash to JBL's behavior showed that the audience has real power in the modern era, and they are absolutely willing to use it to demand accountability from performers and from the company itself. That represents genuine progress. That represents meaningful change. That is what happens when people collectively refuse to accept toxic traditions just because those traditions have existed for a long time, or because powerful people claim they serve some greater purpose. The old excuse of that is just how things are done here no longer works when enough people stand up and say it should not be done that way anymore. So, if you made it all the way to the end of this video, thank you sincerely for watching and for caring about these stories. Hit that like button if this video provided value or information you did not have before. Subscribe to the channel if you want to see more deep dives into wrestling history and backstage culture. Drop a comment below and let me know what you think about this story and these revelations. Share your own thoughts and perspectives. And remember this crucial lesson that applies far beyond just wrestling. Real change, lasting change, meaningful change only happens when people demand it loudly and persistently. The wrestling world and the transformation of its backstage culture is living proof of that truth. See you in the next one.